Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to talk about some fantasy recommendations for beginners. I was chatting with Leandra last night on one of our mini buddy reads that we've done, and we were just spitballing some content creation ideas, and she threw out fantasy for beginners. I know I've done this video before, but I went and checked and it's been 9 months. And I do have some new recommendations for you guys if you guys are watching my channel to try and get fantasy recommendations, but maybe you're new to the genre, maybe you're a little intimidated by some of the heavier hitting, larger fantasy worlds that I read. And so I thought I would give you guys some examples, some recommendations of excellent fantasy books that might be a little less daunting to someone who's not super familiar with the genre. So I have 5 recommendations for you guys, and I have put them in different categories so you can kind of pick and choose what you are comfortable with. The first category I have for you guys is a middle grade recommendation. And I do not read a ton of middle grade, but I have found a few that I really love and adore. And I think that if you are intimidated by those chunkier fantasy reads or even the vast fantasy worlds, I think middle grade is a great place to start getting kind of your feet wet with those types of stories, because the worlds can be vast, but because they are meant for a middle grade audience, they can also be a little bit easier to digest. And so I'm going to recommend one of my most recent reads to you guys, and that is Nevermoor. So it's taken me forever to actually pick up this series, and I know that it is well loved online, and so I probably don't need to tell you about it, but I will just in case you haven't heard of it. You follow a young girl named Morrigan Crow, and she is originally in a situation where she is known as a cursed child. So she lives with her family, her father and her grandmother, and they live in an area where everyone kind of knows that she is on the cursed register. And the cursed register is a registry of kids that are born on a specific day, and it is essentially prophesied that they will die on a specific day on, I think it's their 11th birthday, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's very early on in their childhood. And so this causes some issues within her family in general, with kind of the expectation that her life is not going to continue. Emotional bonds have not really been made. Also, with her being a cursed child, there are some really unfair things that have been placed at her feet. She is the excuse a lot of people use for their lives not being as good as they think they should be. And she has to deal with that at a young age. Well, without giving too much of the story away, but she is essentially taken under someone's wing who brings her to a magic school. And I think that's all I'm going to tell you with that. But you get to see her process, her progress within this magical school, and kind of get to understand her past trauma along with her current progress and growth in her own confidence, I guess I will say. And it does have magical elements with the magical school, and there are all these different characters that you get to meet at the magical school that introduce you to different fantasy elements. For instance, there's a dragon rider. And I just think that this story, it's very cute. It has some very heartwarming elements. Some of the characters in it are very eccentric and funny. And it is a vast world, but like I said, it's easily digestible, and I can't wait to continue the story or the journey with Morrigan Crow to figure out where else she's going to go and what else is going to happen in her life in the next book. The next category I have for you guys is cozy fantasy with a smidge of history as well. So if you typically like historical fiction and you are looking to dip your toe into a little bit of fantasy, I think that the Memoirs of Lady Trent would be a great place for you to start. I have talked about this series a lot on my channel, but I will never stop singing its praises because I love these books. I've only read the first 3 in the series, so once again, I'm recommending you another series. Are you surprised? But I really have enjoyed digging into the Memoirs of Lady Trent, which is what the series title is called. You follow Lady Trent, and these are her stories. It's written like a memoir, and it's her stories of how she became a studier of dragons, a historian of dragons. And she is originally in a world where women are meant to take care of the household. They are not meant to have jobs. They are not meant to get dirty by any means or put themselves into danger. And she wants more. She wants more for her life, and she decides to go out and get it. And so you follow her in all of the books. You follow a different journey that she has taken. The first book, which is A Natural History of Dragons, you follow how she got into the field originally. And then in all of the books after that, you follow a journey that she took within her career that she's kind of known for. And in all of them, you are introduced to different dragons, to different dangers, to different cultures. It's one of the things I really dearly love about this series is that because of the fact that she's traveling all over the world to visit all of these different places, you get to see people all over the world, and she acclimates herself into those societies because she wants to truly understand their culture and learn about the dragons that live amongst them. And so I absolutely love this. And if you're interested in dragons, if you like historical fiction, I do think that this is a pretty good combination of the two. The next category I have for you guys is fantasy romance. So if you are a romance reader and you would like to dip your toe into fantasy, I would recommend The Hanging City. I will say that I do think that this is lighter on the romance than a typical romance book, but I think it makes up for it in the detail of the city. One of the reasons that I want to recommend this book to you guys is this is about the Hanging City, which is a legendary troll city. And I think that even people who have not read a lot of fantasy have heard fairy tales of trolls living under bridges. I just think that that's, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that that's kind of common knowledge as far as like folklore goes. And so to see a story written like this, I just found it fascinating. You follow a girl named Lark who is a human, but she is on the run from her father. And she has traveled very far away from her hometown, and she really doesn't have any other options. And so she seeks out this legendary city of Cogman, which is a troll city that is underneath, it's literally hanging beneath this massive bridge in a canyon. And the city is a troll city because humans and trolls in the past have not gotten along, and there were wars that had happened between the two races, and the trolls were essentially beaten back into this area, and so this is kind of where they sought refuge. And so there is still some animosity between the two races. There's definitely a cultural divide, and she seeks refuge in this troll city because she thinks it's a place that her father can't reach her. And so she decides to live amongst the trolls, which is not as easy as you might assume. And the way that this book describes the city, how things work because of the fact that the trolls don't often leave the Hanging City. How do they get food whenever they don't really have like forests or anything? They're literally living under a bridge. How do they get water? The canyon that the city is in is also full of monsters, and so they have to also figure out how to protect their city from these roaming monsters, and so that's part of the story as well. I just really, really enjoyed the intricacies of the culture that you learn about the trolls, and like I said, the city dynamics as well. And then on top of that, you also have a relationship that forms in this book that is just very sweet, and I really enjoyed this book. So if you are into romance and you also think that it might be cool to learn about some city dynamics of this mythical, legendary place, I think that this would be a fun read for you. The last category I have for you guys is fantasy mystery. And I was going to do 5 different categories, but I just couldn't get past recommending these 2 books. And they're both fantasy mysteries, but they are fantasy mysteries in different realms. So I'm going to start with The Invisible Library. This is a story of Irene, who is a librarian. And the library that we are speaking of is essentially a portal to a whole bunch of different realms and worlds. And so this story is very vast in it's also a series. So The Hanging City is not, though. So I did recommend one that's not a series. But the rest of them are series. Sorry, I'm a series girly. You guys are just gonna have to get over it. Anyway, so it is a very vast series. It has a lot of growth throughout the series, but each of the books is mainly focused in one realm or another. And so I do think that it's very manageable, even for someone who isn't used to reading about, multiple realms at once. You follow Irene, who's a librarian, and the goal of the Invisible Library, so the library that it literally connects to all of these different realms, is to protect and guard different artifacts from all of these different worlds. So if there is something that is very important about a world, the library will ascertain that item and essentially keep it in their archives, which also helps solidify the bonds of that library to that realm. And the librarians within the Invisible Library are responsible for obtaining these items, protecting these items, and also managing the worlds within. And Irene gets called to ascertain an item in a specific world where chaos is running amok. And chaos is something that the librarians do tend to avoid. And she gets herself into a bit of a pickle. And she also, during this process, is training a underling named Kai that comes along with her. And I think that this series is very good at introducing you to some classic fantasy things, fairies, dragons, different things like that, and still allowing for creativity. So it's not this would be great for people who have read fantasy as well, but I think that it does a good enough job explaining its own way that the Fae work, its own way that the dragons work, that you don't have to have the background knowledge of Fae and dragons in order to understand what's going on. There are also other creatures and other things that are happening. There are vampires and ghosts and things like that as well. So I just think that it encompasses everything. And there is a mystery going on as well with an artifact going missing, and so you have to figure out what happened and why. And yeah, it's a blast. I've only read the first 2 books, and this video is making me want to pick up the third, which is a book I really want to get to this year. I want to continue this series this year because I've had a lot of fun with it. And the next fantasy mystery I have for you guys is The Stranger Times. So the reason that I couldn't get over recommending both of these, The Invisible Library and The Stranger Times, is because The Invisible Library is very vast. And in the fact that there are multiple realms going on, there's a lot of bits and bobs and pieces that are in play in this world. And The Stranger Times is more narrow. It still has a lot going on in the mystery. There are still some elements that I think will surprise you, and it's just, I feel like it's more condensed than The Invisible Library is. And so I also feel like The Invisible Library is a little bit more classic fantasy, whereas The Stranger Times, I think, is a little bit more modern, urban fantasy as well. So anyway, The Stranger Times, you follow Hannah, who is a little bit down on her luck, and she's looking for a job, and she ends up finding a job at a newspaper, which is called The Stranger Times. And this Stranger Times literally reports on the weird things that are happening in the city. And so a lot of people think that the newspaper is quote unquote trash, and the fact that it just reports silly things that aren't real. And there happens to be a murder that happens pretty early on in the book, and it is connected in some way to the Stranger Times. And so Hannah decides to investigate, and you end up seeing some pretty dark and dangerous things come into play. One of the things I really liked about this is you are constantly questioning whether or not these strange things that this newspaper entity reports on are real. So you're caught in between our world where you're like, okay, this is obviously false, and the fantasy world where you're like, I don't know, like I'm reading a fictional book, like maybe these things are real in this world, and you're just trying to, so that's one of the pieces of the mystery throughout. You're trying to figure out, are these things real or are they not? And then I also really enjoyed the cast of characters in this. You follow Hannah, who is the main character, but within the newspaper, you have the editor and you have all of her co-workers as well that form this really interesting crew of misfits that work together to solve the case. And I really enjoyed that environment as well. So those are my 5 recommendations for fantasy books for beginners. If you guys have other recommendations, if you are avid fantasy readers, or maybe if you're beginners to the fantasy realm and you found a book that you just think would be perfect for other people who are looking to dip their toe into fantasy, leave them in the comments down below. I would love for them to be able to check out the comments and just have a vast list of books that they can continue their journey into the fantasy genre, because I absolutely love this genre. I want more people to read it. I want more people to experience what I've experienced. Because it is my heart and soul when it comes to reading. I absolutely love it. And I'm glad that you guys are at least interested in this. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.